The first time I heard my wife plan to blame our son for stealing nearly $500,000. I was sitting 12 feet away from her in a Franklin County courtroom. Elaine was at the petitioner's table in a navy suit, her silver blonde hair pinned neatly behind her ears, looking like the composed woman I had trusted for 38 years. Our son, Noah, sat in the witness chair with an old black phone resting between his hands. After his attorney finished establishing where the device had been stored, Noah looked at his mother and said, "Mom, I'm sorry, but I kept every conversation." He pressed play. Elaine's recorded voice filled the courtroom. "Use the earlier date on the invoice. If Daniel finds it, you signed everything. He'll believe you took the money." My chest tightened, but the date displayed on the evidence screen disturbed me even more. The recording had been made 3 years earlier, long before Elaine claimed our marriage had become unbearable. Noah did not look at me while the recording played. His eyes remained fixed on the witness rail, and I could not tell whether he had brought that phone to save me, destroy his mother, or confess something that would ruin us all. The judge raised one hand when Elaine's attorney objected, and the audio stopped in the middle of her sentence. That silence was worse than the words. "I am Daniel Mercer, 66 years old, founder of Mercer Heritage Restoration. And until that morning I believed I understood the worst things my family had done to me. I was wrong. Stay with me." Because what Noah revealed did not begin in a courtroom, and it did not begin with a divorce. It began 3 years earlier, at our dining room table, with a bank alert, a missing $68,000. And the moment I chose to trust my son instead of asking the question that might have saved all 3 of us. Back then, Elaine and I lived in a red brick house in Worthington, just north of Columbus. We had bought it when Noah was 6 and paid off the mortgage 2 years before everything fell apart. Elaine had cried when I handed her the final statement, and I remember feeling proud enough to mistake that pride for intimacy. I had spent most of my adult life restoring buildings. Other people had neglected Victorian homes, stone churches, old courthouses with water damage hidden behind fresh paint. I knew how to find rot beneath plaster, but I had never learned to recognize it inside my own marriage. Mercer Heritage Restoration employed 42 people and carried several long-term municipal contracts. Elaine had helped me start it from our basement, answering phones while Noah napped and typing invoices after midnight. When the company grew, I hired accountants and office managers. I told myself I was freeing her from work. Elaine later told me I had erased her from the story. Noah was 29 then, tall like me, with Elaine's patient eyes and a habit of rubbing his thumb along his jaw whenever he was hiding discomfort. He had studied construction management and joined the company after college. I told everyone he would run it someday. Yet I corrected his estimates, rewrote his proposals, and overruled him in front of supervisors who had known him since childhood. I called that protecting the business. Noah called it being treated like a trainee with an executive title. I loved him, but I rarely said it without attaching an expectation. A good month earned dinner and praise. A mistake earned 2 hours in my office while I explained everything he should have noticed. Elaine often defended him, and I dismissed her concerns by saying, "He'll thank me when the company is his." What I did not say was that I had already met with a business attorney to make that future official, and I had not invited either of them into the conversation. The succession agreement was only a draft. It proposed that Noah gradually purchase voting shares after my retirement while Elaine received income through a marital trust and retained her full claim to the value of the company. I was not trying to leave my wife penniless. I was trying to keep a restoration firm from being divided or sold after I died. Still, I had made those decisions alone. I kept the documents in a legal envelope inside my office briefcase, then left the briefcase open on the kitchen bench one evening after a long meeting. Elaine found the envelope while looking for a receipt. She did not confront me. For weeks, she simply began asking careful questions. "What happens to the company if you have a stroke?" she asked over breakfast. Would Noah control everything? I answered with jokes and reassurances, never realizing she had read enough to know I was avoiding the truth. My silence did not calm her. It confirmed every fear she had already formed. Elaine began spending more time with Noah after work. That did not seem unusual. They had always been close, especially during the years when I missed school concerts, birthdays, and 2 family vacations because a client had discovered some emergency I considered more important. She told him she feared I might sell the company, marry someone younger, or change my estate plan without warning. Noah later admitted that part of him believed her because I had trained him to expect decisions, not discussions. Elaine proposed creating a small consulting company in his name. It would receive legitimate planning fees from Mercer Heritage, build credit, and hold emergency funds in case I became incapacitated. They called it North Cedar Consulting because Cedar Street was where Elaine and I had rented our first apartment. The name should have made me suspicious when I eventually saw it. Instead, I thought it sounded like another harmless company created by an ambitious young manager testing his independence. The bank alert arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was standing inside an abandoned school auditorium, arguing with an engineer about ceiling supports. My phone vibrated twice in my coat pocket. The first notification showed a draw against our commercial line of credit. The second showed a payment of $68,000 to North Cedar Consulting. I had approved neither transaction. I called our accounting office, but the controller was attending a funeral, and the assistant bookkeeper said the invoice carried Noah's electronic authorization. I spent the drive home imagining a software error, a duplicate payment, or a subcontractor registered under an unfamiliar legal name. Theft did not occur to me. Betrayal did not occur to me. That was the weakness beneath all my supposed experience, I believed. Providing for people made them incapable of deceiving me. By the time I reached the house, Elaine had already set the table, and Noah was opening a bottle of wine as though nothing unusual had happened. I placed my phone beside Noah's plate and asked, "What is North Cedar Consulting?" Elaine's hand paused over the serving bowl, but only for a second. Noah looked at the screen, then at his mother. That glance should have told me everything. Instead, I waited for words. Elaine said North Cedar had reviewed our succession risks and vendor structure. She spoke smoothly, using phrases she had heard during years of company dinners. "You approved the restructuring work last quarter," she told me. "You probably forgot because you were focused on the courthouse project." I had forgotten meetings before, and Elaine knew it. Noah cleared his throat and said, "It's legitimate, Dad. I handled it." I asked where the reports were. He said they were still being compiled. His thumb moved against his jaw. My instincts warned me that something was wrong, but pride stepped in front of instinct. Accusing my son would mean admitting I had raised a man I could not trust. I told Noah to bring the reports to my office by Friday. Then I picked up my fork and changed the subject. That single decision became a doorway Elaine walked through for the next 3 years. No reports appeared on Friday. Noah said the consultants needed more data. The following week, he said a file had been corrupted. Eventually, daily problems buried the question. A contract deadline moved forward. One of our project managers resigned. Elaine's sister needed surgery. Whenever I remembered North Cedar, I told myself Noah deserved room to make his own decisions. I did not know the company was registered to a mailbox 20 minutes from our house. I did not know Elaine had access to its online banking. I did not know that the $68,000 was only the first transfer. Most of all, I did not know Noah had begun recording conversations with his mother less than 2 months after that dinner. The changes in Elaine were subtle at first. She began keeping a notebook in the kitchen and closing it whenever I entered. She asked whether high blood pressure could affect judgment and suggested I schedule neurological testing after I forgot the name of a client at a charity dinner. She photographed a cracked cabinet door after I slammed it during an argument about Noah's spending. I repaired the hinge the next morning and apologized. But she kept the photograph. She saved angry texts without preserving the messages that came before them. When I wrote, "I will shut down every account before I let you destroy the company," I meant a vendor account connected to a questionable payment. Elaine later presented those words as a threat to cut off her access to money. I gave her material because I was impatient, dismissive, and too certain that context would always protect me. Context protects no one once another person controls the record. 6 months before Elaine filed for divorce, I found photocopies of my medical records in a drawer beneath the guest room towels. They included my cardiologist's notes, medication history, and a routine screening that mentioned occasional stress-related memory lapses. Beside them was a handwritten list of dates. Some were arguments I remembered. Others were ordinary evenings marked with phrases such as confused about schedule, raised voice, and financial threat. I carried the papers downstairs and asked Elaine what they meant. She looked frightened, but not surprised. "I've been worried about you," she said. "You forget things. Daniel, you get angry when anyone questions you." I accused her of building a case against me. She pressed both hands against the counter and replied, "The fact that you think concern is an attack proves why I had to document it." Noah arrived during the argument. He stood between us, but when I asked whose side he was on, he said nothing. 2 weeks later, a sheriff's deputy entered my office while 12 employees watched through the glass conference room wall. He handed me a temporary protection order and instructions prohibiting me from returning home or contacting Elaine directly. Her sworn complaint stated that I had smashed property, threatened to leave her without money, monitored her spending, and made her fear for her safety. Some events had roots in truth. I had broken a ceramic bowl when I swept papers from a counter. I had threatened to freeze accounts while investigating missing funds. I had demanded passwords to financial records. But the version in Elaine's filing turned moments of anger into a sustained campaign of terror. I wanted to drive home and confront her. Yet the deputy warned me that violating the order could lead to arrest. So I packed 2 shirts from my office closet and spent that night in a furnished apartment normally used by visiting project managers. The next morning, my attorney, Rachel Kim, placed a document in front of me and said, "You need to read this before we discuss strategy." It was an affidavit signed by Noah. My son stated that he had witnessed years of controlling behavior, that I used the company to intimidate Elaine, and that my judgment had become increasingly unstable. He described the broken bowl, the cabinet door, and arguments I believed had remained inside our family. He also said Elaine had often tried to calm me, while he feared I might retaliate against anyone who challenged my authority. I read the pages twice, hoping the signature would change. Rachel told me not to contact him. I nodded, walked into the apartment bathroom, and locked the door. I did not cry. I stared at my reflection and wondered whether every sacrifice I had made had purchased obedience instead of love, and whether my wife and son had finally decided the price was no longer worth paying. That night, Atunci 14:40 și 7. The old work phone I kept charging beside the bed displayed a voicemail from Noah's former company number. His voice was low and hurried. "Dad, don't answer Mom's accusations yet. Save every email and every invoice. I can't tell you why not on this phone." The message ended with the sound of a door opening. Before I could replay it, the voicemail vanished from the server. Fortunately, years of documenting job site disputes had taught me never to trust a single copy. I had activated a handheld recorder the moment I saw Noah's number, and his warning remained on the device in my palm. I listened to it 4 times. The affidavit said he feared me. The voicemail sounded as though he feared someone else. For the first time since the deputy entered my office, my anger became quiet enough for me to think. Noah had betrayed me on paper, but somewhere beyond those words, he was asking me to preserve evidence. I just did not know whether the evidence would expose Elaine or him. Rachel listened to Noah's message twice without changing her expression. Then she held out her hand for the recorder and locked it inside a padded evidence envelope. "You cannot call him," she said. "You cannot text him. Oh, signal him. Send a friend. Or arrange an accidental meeting. His affidavit makes him a witness, and Elaine's attorneys will describe any contact as intimidation." I told her Noah had contacted me, not the other way around. Rachel replied that truth and appearance were different currencies in family court, and at that moment I was nearly bankrupt in both. She instructed me to preserve every email, invoice, calendar entry, and bank statement connected to Elaine, Noah, North Cedar, or my succession plan. I wanted to defend myself immediately, to write the judge a letter explaining every exaggerated accusation. Rachel shook her head. "Your wife has been building a timeline. An angry response would become her newest exhibit." For the first time in my life, doing nothing felt more difficult than fighting. The temporary hearing took place 9 days later. Elaine entered the courtroom wearing a gray dress I had bought her for our 35th anniversary. She looked tired but controlled, like someone carrying a burden she had hidden for years. Her attorney did not call me violent. He called me unpredictable. He said I had used financial authority to control the household. discouraged Elaine from understanding our assets, and made every disagreement feel like a threat to her security. Elaine testified softly. She described the broken bowl, the slammed cabinet, and the message about shutting down accounts. She never raised her voice or added unnecessary drama. That restraint made every accusation sound heavier. When Rachel questioned her, Elaine said, "Daniel provided for us. But provision is not the same as partnership." The sentence landed because it contained enough truth to make the lies around it harder to separate. I had given her a comfortable life while making too many decisions alone. Noah testified after lunch. He wore the dark suit I had purchased for his first meeting with a city contracting board. When Elaine's attorney asked whether he had seen me lose control, he answered yes. He described arguments accurately but removed every detail that explained why they began. He mentioned the night I struck the cabinet but not the unsigned invoice lying on the counter. He mentioned my threat to freeze accounts but not the unauthorized transfers that had triggered it. Rachel asked whether Elaine had ever instructed him what to say. His thumb moved against his jaw. "No," he replied. For 1 second, his eyes met mine. There was shame in them, but shame did not tell me whether he regretted lying or regretted being caught. The judge extended the order keeping me out of the house and restricted large business transactions until both sides produced complete financial disclosures. Elaine lowered her head as though relieved. I gripped the table until my knuckles ached. Outside the courtroom, I made the mistake Rachel had warned me against. Elaine's attorney passed close enough that I could smell his peppermint gum, and I said, "You know she's lying." I did not shout. I did not threaten him, but he stopped, turned, and asked Rachel whether she had heard me confront opposing counsel. By that afternoon, my statement had been added to a filing describing my inability to respect legal boundaries. Rachel waited until we were inside her car before speaking. "Every time you react, Daniel, they get something useful. Stop giving them gifts." I stared through the windshield at Elaine and Noah, leaving together. She touched his arm. He opened her car door. Anyone watching would have seen a frightened mother, protected by a devoted son. I saw the boy I had taught to measure twice before cutting, helping his mother build a case from pieces of our life. Whether he was trapped or willing no longer mattered to the damage already done. The company began feeling the consequences within days. A reporter called our office asking whether Mercer Heritage might be sold during the divorce. One of our municipal clients postponed approval on a restoration contract worth $1.4 million, citing uncertainty about ownership and management. Our bank requested updated guarantees before renewing the commercial credit line. I had enough work to keep 42 people employed. But construction companies survive on timing. We paid workers and suppliers weeks before clients paid us. A frozen transaction at the wrong moment could stop payroll even when the business looked profitable on paper. Employees avoided my eyes in the hallway. A project manager named Luis finally entered my office and asked whether their jobs were safe. I told him yes, though I did not know. That lie felt different from Elaine's. I meant it as reassurance, but intention did not make it true. For the first time, our family conflict was threatening people who had nothing to do with it. The court allowed me to receive a fixed salary and approve ordinary operating expenses. But anything outside routine business required notice. Elaine argued that this protected marital property. In practice, it gave her attorneys a view of every move I made, while their own preparation remained hidden behind privilege. I spent my evenings in the furnished apartment studying documents spread across a dining table designed for temporary tenants. The room smelled faintly of detergent and someone else's cooking. Rachel had given me one instruction: do not search for evidence that proved Elaine was evil. Search for evidence that proved what happened. That distinction irritated me because anger wanted a villain. Facts required patience. I started with the $68,000 payment, then listed every vendor I did not recognize. North Cedar appeared again and again in amounts small enough to blend into project costs: $22,000, $31,000, $46,000. Each attached to descriptions that sounded professional and meant almost nothing. At the next deposition, I saw Noah for the first time since the hearing. He sat across a conference table beside his attorney and answered questions about North Cedar. He confirmed that he had formed the company, controlled its bank account, and approved services for Mercer Heritage. His answers were careful and technically true. When Rachel asked him to identify work North Cedar had produced, He named market research, risk analysis, PA, and succession consulting. She requested copies. Noah said some records had been lost during a software migration. I felt rage climbing into my throat, but Rachel placed 2 fingers on my notebook without looking at me. I stayed silent. As the deposition ended, Noah gathered his papers slowly. 3 invoices lay on top, marked with dates in yellow highlighter. He pressed his palm against them, then looked directly at me for 3 long seconds. His attorney called his name. Noah closed the folder and left. The gesture was small enough to deny and deliberate enough to remember. The dates were April 14, September 11, and January 23. Rachel told me not to assume anything, but she permitted our forensic accountant to compare them with company records. His name was Martin Shaw, a 57-year-old former bank examiner with the patient voice of a man who enjoyed finding mistakes more than making accusations. Martin asked for server logs, travel calendars, vendor files, tax returns, and bank statements. 2 weeks later, he sat in Rachel's office and placed a spreadsheet in front of us. Mercer Heritage had paid North Cedar $487,000 over 3 years. I read the total twice. Some payments had come from operating accounts. Others had been drawn against the credit line. Nearly every invoice carried Noah's electronic approval, which meant that on paper my son had redirected almost $500,000 from the company he expected to inherit. I asked Martin whether Noah had stolen it. He said, "I can tell you where the money moved. Motive requires more than a ledger." North Cedar had transferred approximately $170,000 into an investment account in Noah's name. Another portion covered credit cards and miscellaneous expenses. More than $200,000 had moved through 2 accounts associated with Elaine, including one I had never seen. Rachel reminded me that transfers between spouses were not automatically theft, especially in a marital estate. The problem was concealment, false invoicing, and the use of company credit for services that might not exist. I wanted Rachel to confront Elaine immediately. She refused. "If we show them everything, they will build an explanation around it. First, we determine who created the invoices." I hated the restraint in her strategy, but I was beginning to understand that Elaine's greatest advantage was knowing how I would react. She expected anger. Silence forced her to wait. Martin examined the 3 dates Noah had highlighted. On April 13, Noah had been inspecting a courthouse renovation in Cincinnati. On September 11, he had attended a construction conference in Denver. On January 23, he had been hospitalized overnight after a job site fall fractured his wrist. Yet invoices bearing his electronic signature had been created and uploaded on each date. Server logs showed that 2 were submitted from an internet address registered to our Worthington house. The 3rd came from a laptop usually used by Elaine for household finances. That did not prove she had typed them. Passwords could be shared. Devices could be borrowed. And electronic signatures could be applied by anyone with access. But it proved Noah had directed us toward dates when he could not reasonably have done the work himself. His cold testimony and hidden message no longer fit together. Either he was manipulating both sides, or he was leaving markers inside a story he could not safely tell aloud. I thought back to the first years of the company, when Elaine handled every invoice from a folding desk beside our washing machine. She understood purchase orders, bank reconciliations, vendor codes, and tax classifications better than I did. Later, after we hired professional staff, she began joking that technology had passed her by. "I can barely reset the television," she often said whenever I asked about online accounts. I had accepted that version of her because it made our roles simple. I was the businessman. She was the wife who no longer wanted involvement. Martin's report suggested something else. Elaine had never forgotten how the financial system worked. She had simply allowed me to forget that she knew. The realization did not excuse what she might have done, but it revealed another blind spot. I had mistaken her withdrawal for ignorance when it may have been resentment, observation, and preparation. Rachel questioned Elaine under oath about North Cedar. Elaine said Noah had created the company independently and that she had never controlled its operations. She acknowledged receiving money but described it as reimbursement for family expenses she had covered over many years. When Rachel asked why those reimbursements came from a corporate consultant rather than our joint account, Elaine replied that Noah handled the details. I trusted my son, she said, then looked at me as though trust were the difference between us. Her attorney suggested Noah might have moved company money because he feared I would never surrender control. Elaine did not accuse him directly. She merely said, I hope Daniel does not destroy our child to protect his own reputation. The tactic was precise. If I blamed Noah, I became a ruthless father. If I defended him, I weakened my own financial case. Elaine had positioned herself as the only person concerned about him while every document pointed toward his name. After the deposition, Martin obtained limited access to archived company emails under the court's discovery order. We found messages between Elaine and Noah that seemed ordinary until we read them beside the payments. Please revise the description, she wrote one evening. The current wording invites questions. Another said, use the date we discussed, not the upload date. A third instructed him to send the final copy from his account because your father checks my address too closely. Noah's replies were short, okay. I'll handle it. And once, this is getting bigger than what you said, Elaine answered. Only because he refuses to make us secure. The emails did not show whether Noah was resisting, cooperating, or both. They did show that Elaine's sworn claim of knowing nothing about North Cedar's operations was false. Rachel finally allowed herself a small nod. Now we have contradiction, she said. Contradiction is more useful than outrage. My instinct was still to expose everything at once. But Rachel made me change strategy. We quietly restricted internal access without publicly accusing anyone. Passwords were reset through an independent administrator. Future vendor approvals required 2 signatures. Martin preserved the server images. I stopped discussing the divorce with employees. Even when rumors grew, I also began reviewing my own messages. Not just Elaine's. Some embarrassed me. I had dismissed her questions, mocked her concerns about retirement, and told Noah he was not ready whenever he requested more authority. None of that justified false documents, but it explained why both of them had been vulnerable to a secret plan promising control. I had spent decades believing family loyalty meant trusting me to decide. Now I understood loyalty without transparency was just dependence wearing a respectable suit. That recognition did not soften the betrayal. It made the whole thing more painful because I could see where I had helped prepare the ground. 3 nights later, Martin called and asked me to come to Rachel's office. He had recovered a deleted invoice template from an archive drive connected to the laptop at the house. The file had been renamed several times, but its original title remained in the metadata NCM, exit, plan, final. The creator field listed Elaine Mercer. Martin opened the document and showed us hidden revision notes that had not appeared in the printed version. Most concerned payment dates and invoice language. One line sat beneath a section describing future disputes if D. M. challenges the transfers. N takes responsibility and confirms instability timeline. I read it slowly. D. M. was me. N was Noah. The words linked the missing money, the medical notes, the affidavit, and Elaine's accusations into one structure. North Cedar had never been an isolated mistake. It was an exit plan, and my son had been designed as both its instrument and its sacrifice. The note hidden inside the deleted file changed what we were looking for, but it did not tell us who had written the plan or how deeply Noah had participated. Rachel warned me that metadata could be challenged. Explanations could be invented, and a single recovered document would not carry an entire case. We needed testimony, original devices, and a financial trail that survived cross-examination. 2 days later, an email appeared in an account I had not opened in nearly 6 years. Noah and I had created it for fishing trips, so clients could not reach us on weekends. The subject line contained the name of the lake where I had taught him to cast. The message said only, Wednesday, 6:40 a.m. North lot behind St. Matthews. Come alone. Park, facing the street. Rachel advised against going until I reminded her that Noah had reached out voluntarily, and the protection order prohibited contact with Elaine, not our adult son. She insisted I record nothing secretly and call her immediately afterward. The church parking lot was empty except for Noah's truck and a delivery van near the kitchen entrance. Dawn had not fully broken, and the security lights gave everything a pale, artificial color. Noah stood outside his truck with both hands visible, as though meeting his own father required evidence that he carried no weapon. He looked thinner than he had at the deposition. When I approached, he said, "I have 20 minutes before Mom realizes I left early." I wanted to demand an explanation for the affidavit, the missing money, and every lie he had told under oath. Instead, I asked the simplest question. "Why did you warn me?" Noah stared toward the church doors. "Because the plan changed," he said. "It stopped being about protecting her. It became about making sure somebody else went down first." I asked who that somebody was. He finally looked at me. "At the beginning, it was you. Now it's me." Noah admitted that North Cedar had been his idea in form, though not in purpose. Elaine told him they needed a legal consulting entity that could hold emergency funds if I became ill, sold the company, or changed the succession plan. He filed the registration, opened the account, and signed the first invoice himself. "I wasn't tricked into everything," he said. "I was angry at you, and she knew it." He reminded me how often I had promised that Mercer Heritage would become his, while refusing to let him approve a change order without calling me. I had given him responsibility without authority, then criticized him for acting uncertain. Elaine told him I might sell to an outside buyer before retirement because I did not believe he was capable. She said North Cedar would let him build independent credit and prove he could manage money. The first payment was presented as compensation for planning work Noah had actually performed after hours. He knew the description exaggerated its value. He signed anyway because receiving money outside my approval felt like the first decision he had ever made for himself. Then Noah told me why Elaine had approached him at all. She had found the succession agreement in my briefcase and read enough to understand that voting control would eventually pass from me to him. She did not understand or did not trust the provisions guaranteeing her income and marital share. What she saw was a plan for two men to decide the future of the business she had helped create, while treating her as a beneficiary who would receive whatever they considered appropriate. "She said you had already divorced her on paper," Noah told me. "You just hadn't told her yet." The sentence struck harder than any accusation in her legal filings because I could imagine exactly how she had reached that conclusion. I had protected her financially while excluding her personally. The agreement was not evidence that I wanted to abandon her, but secrecy had made it look like preparation. For the first time, I understood that North Cedar had not begun as a scheme to steal the company. It had begun as Elaine's private insurance against being erased. The first $68,000 transfer was larger than Noah expected. Elaine said the company owed her for years of unpaid administrative work and that the money remained part of the family's wealth. When Noah objected, she reminded him that the invoice carried his signature and that I would cancel the succession plan if I learned he had created an outside business using company funds. He approved another payment to cover what she called retirement protection. Then another followed, for supposed market analysis. Each transfer made it harder for him to stop because stopping required admitting what had already happened. Elaine began using his login credentials from the house, sometimes telling him afterward, and sometimes not. When he challenged her, she showed him copies of the invoices, bank authorizations, and emails in which he had agreed to help. "She never had to threaten me directly at first," Noah said. "She only had to ask what you would do if you saw the file." He knew the answer, because I had spent his entire life teaching him that professional dishonesty was unforgivable. Noah began recording his conversations with Elaine 4 months after North Cedar was formed. He used an old phone with no cellular service and placed it face down whenever she asked him to visit. He told me Ohio permitted a participant to record a conversation, but legality was not what had motivated him. "I thought she might blame me," he said. "I wanted proof I wasn't acting alone." He had not been gathering evidence for me. He had been building a shield for himself. Every few weeks, he transferred the files to an encrypted drive and wrote down the date, location, and subject in a paper notebook he kept inside a locked toolbox. When Elaine began asking him to describe my anger in more dramatic language, he recorded those conversations too. Still, he continued helping her. Fear and self-interest had not turned him innocent merely because he documented them. I kept telling myself I needed one more recording before I could stop. He said. Then one more payment happened, and I needed another. He played one of the early recordings inside his truck. Elaine's voice sounded exhausted rather than calculating. She told Noah that she had spent decades making my ambitions possible, and now feared waking up at 70, with no authority over anything she had built. She said, "Your father calls it security when he keeps all the keys." Noah answered that the agreement gave her income. Elaine replied, "Income can be changed by the person who controls it." There was no forged invoice discussed in that conversation. No plot to accuse me of abuse. Only fear sharpened by resentment. Hearing it forced me to confront a truth I would have preferred to avoid. Elaine's first instinct had not been greed. It had been panic. I had treated financial provision as proof that she could never reasonably feel powerless. By refusing to discuss the plan, I had made her fear look irrational to me and completely rational to her. That did not excuse what followed. But it changed where the story began. The later recordings were different. Noah played a conversation from the year after the first transfer. Elaine instructed him to use an earlier invoice date, because a current date would connect the payment to her meeting with a divorce attorney. When he refused, she reminded him that North Cedar belonged to him and said, "You wanted independence. Independence means owning what you signed." Another recording captured her directing him to keep notes about my temper. She told him not to invent incidents, only to describe them without protecting me. Then she added that if I challenged the transfers, a documented pattern of instability would make my objections appear retaliatory. In a third recording, Noah asked what would happen if investigators traced the money. Elaine answered, "They will see your company, your password, and your approvals. I will say I trusted you." That was the voice I had heard in court, not the frightened woman on the first recording. Somewhere between fear and opportunity. Elaine had stopped building protection and started building control. I asked Noah why he signed the affidavit if he possessed recordings proving his mother was manipulating the case. His face tightened. Elaine had prepared copies of the earliest emails, the ones showing that Noah had volunteered to create North Cedar and approved the first payments without pressure. She told him that if he refused to support her claims, those records would be given to company counsel, the court, and possibly prosecutors. She did not need to fabricate his involvement. His involvement was real. I thought if I stayed close, I could keep her from deleting everything or moving the rest of the money. He said, "I thought I could fix it before you learned what I'd done." I stepped away from the truck because I was afraid I might strike the door or say something that would end whatever remained between us. My son had watched me lose my home, my reputation, and control of my company while waiting for the safest moment to become honest. His fear explained his silence. It did not make the silence less cruel. "You let me believe you thought I was dangerous," I told him. Noah did not defend himself. He said the affidavit contained events he had witnessed but described them in the way Elaine wanted. He admitted that some of my behavior had frightened him, though not because he believed I would harm anyone physically. He feared my ability to end careers, withdraw approval, and turn disappointment into exile. I wanted to reject that description, but memories answered before I could. I had fired a superintendent in front of the crew. I had stopped speaking to Noah for 3 days after he lost a bid. I had once told Elaine that anyone who endangered the company would no longer be family to me. I meant those statements as discipline. To the people closest to me, they had sounded like conditions attached to love. "You should have told me anyway," I said. Noah nodded. Yes. It was the first answer he gave me that contained no defense. And somehow that made it harder to hate him. I called Rachel from the parking lot before leaving. By noon, Noah sat in her conference room with his own attorney, because Rachel could not represent both of us once he admitted potential financial misconduct. His lawyer, Amanda Price, explained that cooperating could reduce his exposure, but would not erase it. False invoices, unauthorized transfers, and misleading sworn statements carried consequences beyond divorce court. Noah handed over the old phone, the encrypted drive, and the handwritten log. Rachel refused to listen casually. She arranged for a digital forensic specialist to create verified copies and preserve the originals. Every recording would need to be matched with bank records, emails, travel dates, or subsequent conduct. Noah would also have to admit the first year of willing participation. A selective confession would make the entire collection look like retaliation against Elaine. I asked whether we could protect him. Rachel said, "You can tell the truth. Protection is not the same as concealment." That evening, I made the most painful strategic decision of the case. I would not blame everything on Elaine to save Noah, and I would not sacrifice Noah to strengthen my claim against her. We would disclose the succession agreement, including my failure to discuss it with my wife. Noah would surrender the funds still held in North Cedar and provide a complete accounting. We would identify which transfers he had approved voluntarily, which Elaine had directed, and which had been created through his credentials while he was elsewhere. The plan carried risk because truth rarely arranges itself into heroes and villains. Elaine's attorneys could show my secrecy, my anger, and Noah's ambition. They could argue that mother and son had only protected themselves from a controlling man. Rachel said our strongest position was not innocence in every family failure. It was precision. Admit what is true before they use it to hide what is false. She told me I had spent my career covering damage with craftsmanship. Now the only repair available required exposing the structure. We did not move quickly enough. Elaine learned about the church meeting within 48 hours. Noah believed she had checked location data from a family account he had forgotten she could access. Her attorneys filed an emergency motion accusing me of contacting a witness, pressuring Noah to change his testimony, and manufacturing a financial defense after the discovery of the transfers. They attached messages from the first months of North Cedar. In one, Noah wrote, "I agree, we need something Dad can't control." In another, he suggested increasing an invoice so the account would grow faster. The messages were authentic. Read without the later recordings. They made Noah appear to be the architect and me, the father, now coercing him into blaming his mother. Elaine also produced a photograph of my truck in the church parking lot. I understood then that while we had been preserving evidence, she had been documenting movement. Her case had always depended on anticipating how frightened people behaved. At the emergency hearing, Noah's attorney admitted the meeting had occurred but denied coercion. The judge was visibly frustrated that both sides had allowed family communications to continue around pending testimony until the recordings could be examined. She suspended my direct operational authority and appointed a temporary monitor to approve significant company decisions. I could advise managers but no longer act alone. The bank responded before the day ended by freezing new draws on our credit line. A supplier demanded immediate payment on an outstanding balance, and Luis called to say rumors of insolvency had reached the job sites. I sat in Rachel's office, while my phone filled with messages from employees whose mortgages depended on a company I could no longer fully control. Elaine had not won the case, but she had pushed me into the position she had described from the beginning. An aging founder whose judgment required supervision. For the first time, I wondered whether telling the full truth would arrive too late to save anything. As we left the courthouse, Noah received a message from Elaine. He showed it to his attorney, then to Rachel, before allowing me to read it. Recant. Or I give them the first year, the part where you volunteered. There was no anger in the wording, only certainty. Elaine believed shame would control Noah more reliably than affection ever had. The first year contained his worst choices: the company registration, the willing signatures, the plan to keep money outside my reach, and the recordings in which he agreed that I should not control the family's future. If those files became public, he could lose his career and whatever reputation remained. If he hid them, every later recording could be attacked as selective and dishonest. Noah looked at me and asked, "What do I do?" I thought of all the years I had answered that question by giving orders. This time I said, "You tell them everything." His face went pale, because we both understood that pressing play might save the truth while destroying the life he expected to return to. Elaine's message gave us the leverage we needed, but only if Noah was willing to survive the damage it promised. Amanda advised him to preserve the text, turn over the phone, and prepare a complete statement covering every payment from the day North Cedar was formed. Rachel warned that partial honesty would be worse than silence, because Elaine's attorneys would expose whatever we omitted and argue that the rest had been manufactured. Noah spent 2 days reconstructing his role from bank records, emails, and recordings. He admitted he had suggested increasing the second invoice, had concealed the account from me, and had used company information to make the consulting work appear legitimate. When he signed the statement, his hands shook. I kept thinking the recordings would become my escape. He said, "They're really a record of how long I stayed." I wanted to tell him courage erased cowardice, It did not. Courage only meant he had finally stopped adding to it. Rachel's strategy required me to appear ready to surrender. Through formal mediation, we offered Elaine the Worthington house, a substantial cash equalization payment, and a share of the company's appraised marital value. In exchange, she would withdraw the claims that I posed a safety threat, accept an independent audit, and abandon her demand for operational control. The offer was generous enough to look like exhaustion without giving away the business itself. Elaine did not respond for 3 days. Then her attorney requested a private settlement conference and presented a counter-proposal. Mercer Heritage had to be sold to an outside investment group within 6 months, with the proceeds divided before any succession plan could take effect. She could have been financially secure under our offer, yet she insisted on a sale. That told us her goal had moved beyond protection. She wanted to guarantee that neither Noah nor I would control the company after the divorce. She wanted the future erased before anyone else could inherit it. I pretended to consider the sale. During mediation, I said the bank pressure and suspended credit line might make an outside buyer the responsible choice. Elaine watched me closely, searching for resistance. When I offered none, she relaxed enough to explain how the proceeds should be divided. Her attorney circulated a spreadsheet listing the house, retirement accounts, company shares, and funds described as previously allocated to Noah through North Cedar. Rachel asked casually whether Elaine had prepared the schedule. Elaine said she had helped organize it from documents produced in discovery. That answer created a problem for her. In sworn testimony, she had claimed she did not understand North Cedar's operations and knew nothing about how Noah handled its funds. Yet the spreadsheet separated specific transfers by date, purpose, and final account. Rachel requested the original electronic file through discovery. Elaine's attorney objected, but the mediator had already marked the schedule as part of the settlement exchange. A document Elaine meant as a demand had become a map of her knowledge. The metadata showed the spreadsheet had been created on Elaine's laptop 7 months before she filed for divorce. Earlier versions contained columns labeled House Leverage, Daniel Instability Record, and Noah Exposure. One revision listed the first North Cedar transfer as proof of shared wrongdoing. Martin matched the figures to bank movements that had not yet appeared in formal discovery at the time the file was created. Elaine could not plausibly claim her attorney had assembled the information later. The document did not prove every accusation false, but it proved she had tracked the money, evaluated how the evidence could pressure each of us, and planned litigation long before she described herself as reacting to an immediate threat. Rachel still refused to celebrate. "It is a strong contradiction," she said. "Not a final victory." By then I had learned that cases were rarely won by one dramatic discovery. They were built by placing enough precise facts together that every convenient explanation collapsed under its own weight. My deposition on the succession agreement came next. Elaine's attorney expected me to minimize it, so I did the opposite. I admitted I had asked a business lawyer to transfer future voting control to Noah. I admitted Elaine had not been consulted. I admitted I had kept the draft in my briefcase and dismissed her questions after she found it. Then Rachel introduced the full agreement. It valued the company as marital property, guaranteed Elaine lifetime income through a funded trust, and required an independent appraisal before Noah could acquire shares. I had not designed it to leave her with nothing, but I had designed it without her. I believed protecting the company meant making the decision myself. I testified. That was unfair to my wife, and it was a mistake. Elaine's attorney paused because denial would have been easier to attack. By acknowledging the secrecy, I removed his ability to reveal it as proof that every other allegation must also be true. Shame, when accepted early, lost some of its usefulness as a weapon. Noah made a decision that surprised even Amanda. He resigned as chief operating officer, waived any immediate right to purchase company shares, and agreed to place the remaining North Cedar funds into a court-controlled account. He also signed a repayment plan, covering the payments he had knowingly approved without legitimate work. The resignation weakened the business during an already dangerous period, but it removed the argument that he was testifying solely to inherit Mercer Heritage. I met him in the conference room after the documents were filed. He placed his company keys and identification badge on the table. "I don't know who I am without this place," he said. I told him that was partly my fault, I had raised him to see the company as both inheritance and proof of worth. I had never asked whether he wanted a different life because I feared his answer. Noah said, I wanted it. I just wanted to know. I earned it. Neither of us knew whether that opportunity still existed. Elaine responded by taking the conflict outside the courtroom. A local business reporter published an article about the frozen credit line, the divorce, and allegations of financial misconduct involving Mercer Heritage. The article did not declare me guilty, but it quoted an unnamed source describing serious concerns about leadership stability. Within 48 hours, the city canceled a preservation contract we had expected to begin that fall. A private client delayed another project, and one of our senior supervisors accepted a position with a competitor. Luis told me workers were asking whether they should find new jobs before payroll failed. I could not blame them. The company monitor approved ordinary expenses, but would not authorize a new loan without agreement from both sides. Elaine refused, saying additional debt would reduce the marital estate. Legally, her position sounded cautious. Practically, it threatened to shut down a solvent company during the period when construction costs were highest and client payments were still months away. I owned a small wooded property near Hocking Hills, purchased 12 years earlier as a place where I imagined Elaine and I would spend retirement weekends. We had built a modest cabin there, though work had prevented us from using it often. Because the property had been acquired partly with inherited money and titled separately, Rachel believed I could sell it without violating the court's restrictions if the proceeds were used transparently. I accepted an offer below its likely future value and directed the money into payroll and supplier obligations under the monitor's supervision. Elaine's attorney called the sale reckless. Employees received their checks on Friday. I drove to the cabin once before closing and stood on the porch while rain moved through the trees. Losing it hurt more than the house because it represented a future I had assumed would wait for us. Winning the case would not return everything destroyed while the truth was being examined. Some losses were simply the price of surviving long enough to be heard. Elaine also moved to exclude Noah's recordings. Her attorney argued that he had edited them, chosen only damaging conversations, and used them as leverage after becoming afraid of criminal exposure. Rachel expected the attack. A forensic audio examiner documented the original file structures, creation dates, device identifiers, and encrypted backups. Noah's paper log matched the digital timestamps. Messages sent immediately after several recordings referred to statements captured in the audio, creating independent confirmation. Martin connected discussions of specific invoices to transfers processed within hours or days. Most importantly, Noah supplied the early recordings in which he willingly participated and criticized me. Those files harmed his own position and made selective fabrication harder to claim. The judge ruled that individual recordings could be admitted if Noah established where and when they were made, authenticated the voices, and accepted full cross-examination. Elaine's expression did not change when the ruling was announced, but she stopped looking at Noah. One obstacle nearly destroyed the plan. The newest phone Noah had used contained several late conversations, including one in which Elaine discussed shifting responsibility for the invoices. When the examiner powered it on, the storage failed and part of the data became unreadable. Elaine's attorney immediately suggested evidence had been altered or destroyed. For 6 hours, we believed the strongest recording might be gone. Then the examiner found that the phone had automatically synchronized encrypted copies to Noah's external drive 3 weeks earlier. The backup logs showed the files existed before the church meeting and before I knew recordings had been made. The failed device could no longer serve as the original source for those particular files. But the preserved copies, synchronization history, and related text messages gave Rachel a foundation to request admission. The incident reminded us how fragile the case remained. We were not walking toward a guaranteed victory. We were carrying damaged evidence through a process designed to question every hand that touched it. Elaine made one final attempt to separate Noah from me. Through Amanda, she offered to accept primary responsibility for North Cedar if Noah signed a statement saying I had pressured him to record her and change his testimony. The proposal would reduce his financial exposure and allow him to describe the first year as an error made under maternal influence. In return, the recordings would become evidence of my supposed manipulation rather than hers. Noah read the terms in silence. Then he asked whether accepting would protect her from consequences. Amanda said it might improve Elaine's settlement position but would also require him to make another false statement. He rejected it. Latter. He told me he had almost signed, because the offer gave him a path back to a respectable life. Then I realized it was the same deal again. He said, "Someone else carries the truth, and I keep what I want." I did not praise him. I simply said, "Now you understand what it costs." The night before trial, Noah and I ate at a diner near Rachel's office. We had spent years discussing schedules, bids, and equipment while avoiding anything that could not be measured. This time he asked whether I had ever considered selling the company and leaving Ohio. I admitted I had, during a difficult year when 3 clients failed to pay, but I had hidden the possibility because I thought uncertainty would frighten the family. Noah smiled without humor. "We were already frightened. We just didn't know what you were deciding." He asked whether I would give him the company if we won. I said no. Not as a reward. Not as forgiveness. And not while he still believed ownership could repair what he had done. He nodded, disappointed but not surprised. I told him I did not know whether trust could be rebuilt. "Tomorrow isn't about getting our old life back," I said. "It's about stopping the lies from choosing the next one." The final hearing began, in a packed courtroom. Elaine testified first and denied directing false invoices, forging dates, or planning to blame Noah. She said North Cedar was his independent venture, and that any money she received had been transferred at his discretion. She acknowledged keeping notes about my anger but described them as a frightened wife's attempt to remember events accurately. Her attorney led her carefully through the succession agreement, the broken property, and my private financial decisions. She cried only once, when she said she had believed Noah was the one person in the family who understood how powerless she felt. I could see that part was true. Elaine had loved him, feared for him, and used him. Those facts existed together. When Rachel asked whether she had ever warned Noah that he would be blamed if the transfers were discovered, Elaine answered, "Absolutely not." The denial was clear enough to become the hinge on which everything else would turn. Noah took the witness stand after lunch. Amanda questioned him first. He admitted forming North Cedar, signing the initial invoices, concealing the account, and agreeing that I should not control every family decision. Murmurs moved through the gallery. Elaine's attorney looked almost pleased. During cross-examination, he asked whether Noah had voluntarily proposed keeping money beyond my reach. Noah said yes. He asked whether I had met Noah secretly after the affidavit. Noah said yes again. He asked whether Noah faced financial and possible legal consequences if the court believed he had acted alone. "Yes," Noah replied. The attorney turned toward the judge and let the answer hang, as though motive had been established and nothing more was needed. For several seconds, it appeared that Noah's honesty had destroyed our position exactly as Elaine predicted. Then Amanda asked why he had brought the old phone. Noah placed it on the evidence table and said, "Because what I agreed to at the beginning is not what my mother turned it into." Rachel requested permission to proceed with the authenticated recordings. Elaine's attorney objected, repeating claims of coercion and selective editing. The judge overruled him for the limited purpose already established and instructed Noah to identify the first file. He gave the date, location, device, and circumstances. It was the same recording I had heard at the beginning of the hearing, made after Elaine asked him to alter an invoice date. Noah looked toward his mother before pressing play. Elaine stared straight ahead. Her recorded voice entered the courtroom. "Use the earlier date on the invoice. If Daniel finds it, you signed everything. He'll believe you took the money." Noah's voice answered, "That isn't what we agreed." Elaine replied, "What we agreed was that this family would not be controlled by him anymore." The audio continued, and every person in that room understood the trial had just changed direction. Noah reached for the next file. The second recording began with Noah asking Elaine why the latest invoice carried a date from 6 weeks earlier. Her answer was calm enough to sound rehearsed. "Because the payment belongs before Daniel discovered the succession agreement. After that, everything looks like retaliation." Noah told her the consulting work had never been performed. Elaine replied that the company owed her far more than the invoice represented and that correcting an unfair marriage was not theft. Rachel stopped the audio and placed the corresponding document on the courtroom screen. Martin had already authenticated its creation history. The invoice was uploaded from our home while Noah was attending the Denver conference. and the payment cleared the following morning. Elaine's attorney argued that she might have uploaded a document Noah prepared earlier. Rachel displayed Noah's flight records, the file's revision history, and an email from Elaine saying, "I changed the date and description. Send it from your account tonight." Nothing alone proved the entire scheme. Together, the pieces made her denial increasingly impossible to maintain. The next recordings traced the plan as it changed. In one, Elaine instructed Noah to preserve photographs of the broken cabinet and write down every time I raised my voice. She did not tell him to invent events. That distinction mattered, and Rachel did not hide it. The recording captured Elaine saying, "Your father gives us enough truth. We only have to stop explaining it for him." Noah asked whether they were documenting the marriage or building a case around the transfers. Elaine answered, "They are the same problem. He controls the money because everyone excuses his temper." I listened without looking away. My anger had been real, and Elaine had understood how to use it. Her strategy depended on authentic moments stripped of proportion and context. The court did not need to believe I had been a good husband to recognize manipulation. Rachel connected the conversation to Elaine's handwritten timeline, showing that several entries were added weeks after the events but dated as though written immediately. The record was not entirely fabricated. It was curated for a purpose she had denied under oath. Then Noah authenticated the recording he feared most. It came from the first year, when he still believed North Cedar could give him independence. His voice sounded confident and resentful. He suggested increasing a payment because, as he put it, "Dad will never give me authority unless I create it myself." Elaine agreed. Noah proposed keeping the account secret until he could prove he had managed it successfully. No threat had forced him. No manipulation erased his choice. Elaine's attorney used the recording to argue that Noah was blaming his mother only after the scheme endangered him. Noah answered, "I am responsible for what you just heard." He acknowledged approving the invoice and concealing it from me. Then Amanda asked what happened when he attempted to stop. Noah identified a later file. Elaine's voice said, "You cannot become moral after signing everything. If Daniel finds out, you explain it. I will say, I trusted you." By admitting the first wrongdoing, Noah gave the later coercion a shape the court could understand. He had entered willingly, but Elaine had built the exit door to lock from her side. Martin testified about the $487,000. He avoided dramatic words and described only transactions he could document. North Cedar received payments from Mercer Heritage for consulting services with no corresponding reports. Research files, or work product. Approximately $170,000 moved into an account controlled by Noah. More than $200,000 passed through accounts associated with Elaine, including the account she had omitted from her initial disclosure. The remainder covered expenses, transfers, and fees. Martin showed that Elaine's settlement spreadsheet tracked those movements months before the divorce filing. Earlier versions contained the labels Noah Exposure and Daniel Instability Record. Her attorney suggested the labels were shorthand prepared after she became afraid. Martin pointed to the file dates and backup history. They predated the protection order petition. The hidden note inside the deleted exit plan template then appeared on the screen. If D. M. challenges the transfers, N takes responsibility and confirms instability timeline. It was not a last-minute surprise. It was the same recovered document that had guided the investigation from the beginning. Elaine took the stand again because her attorney believed she could explain the contradictions. She admitted preparing portions of the spreadsheet but said the labels reflected legal possibilities, not an intention to frame anyone. She claimed Noah had given her the financial information and that she had only organized it. Rachel asked why she had testified earlier that she did not understand North Cedar's finances. Elaine said stress had affected her memory. Rachel then asked whether I had ever physically harmed her. Elaine paused and said no. Had I frightened her? Yes. Had I used silence, money, and the company to end arguments? Yes. Those answers were painful because they were true. Then Rachel asked whether Elaine believed I was mentally incapable of managing the business when she sought emergency restrictions. Elaine answered that she had feared I was declining. Rachel displayed emails written during the same period in which Elaine described me as too sharp to confront without leverage. The woman portrayed as terrified of a confused husband had privately planned around an opponent she considered fully capable. The most damaging recording came near the end of Noah's collection. He asked his mother directly. Do you believe Dad is dangerous? Elaine was silent for several seconds before answering. Not in the way you mean. He is dangerous to anyone who needs him to surrender control. Noah asked why she had described herself as afraid for her physical safety. Elaine replied, because courts understand fear better than they understand 38 years of being dismissed. Her attorney objected to the interpretation Rachel drew from the statement, but the words required little explanation. Elaine had translated emotional powerlessness into a claim more likely to produce immediate legal control. Her fear had not been entirely false. Yet she had described a different kind of danger because it served her purpose. I felt no satisfaction hearing it. The recording did not reveal a stranger. It revealed the woman who had once balanced invoices beside our washing machine, convincing herself that exaggeration was the only language anyone would respect. Understanding how she arrived there did not make the damage acceptable. When I testified, Rachel asked about the succession agreement before opposing counsel could use it against me. I explained why I wanted voting control to pass intact to Noah and why I believed Elaine's financial provisions were sufficient. Then I admitted the arrogance inside that reasoning. I decided what security should mean to her without asking her. I said, I treated the company as mine to protect, even though she helped build the life that made it possible. Elaine watched me with an expression I could not read. I also admitted slamming the cabinet, breaking the bowl, sending angry messages, and using financial authority as the final word in family arguments. Her attorney asked whether that made her fears reasonable. Some of them, I answered. It did not make false invoices real work, and it did not make my son responsible for decisions she directed. I did not ask the judge to declare me blameless. I asked her to distinguish marital failure from financial deception. For once, I did not defend my pride as though it were the same thing as truth. Rachel's closing argument lasted less than 20 minutes. She did not call Elaine greedy or cruel. She described a plan that began with legitimate fear, expanded through concealed transfers, and eventually required a manufactured narrative to protect itself. She reminded the court that Noah had surrendered his position, his expected inheritance, and the remaining North Cedar funds before testifying. His admissions exposed him to consequences and therefore did not resemble a convenient attempt to profit. Elaine's attorney argued that I had created the conditions for secrecy by controlling every major decision, and that Noah had shifted blame after realizing his own liability. That argument contained enough truth to deserve consideration. The judge took the matter under advisement and kept the temporary business monitor in place. We left without a verdict. Outside, reporters waited near the steps. Noah started toward them, but Amanda stopped him. I said nothing to the cameras. After 3 years of competing stories, silence had finally become something other than avoidance. It became respect for a decision we could no longer control. The written ruling arrived 12 days later. The judge found that Elaine's most serious allegations about physical danger and cognitive instability were not supported by the complete record. The temporary protection restrictions were dissolved. She concluded that North Cedar had been used to divert and conceal marital business assets through invoices lacking legitimate services, with responsibility shared by Elaine and Noah in different degrees, because forcing an immediate sale of Mercer Heritage would reduce its value, endanger active contracts, and harm employees. I retained operational control subject to independent financial oversight during the remaining distribution process. The company was still marital property. I did not simply keep everything because I had founded it. An appraiser determined its value. Elaine received an equitable share, and the court credited the diverted funds against portions of the distribution. She kept part of our retirement assets and enough liquid funds to establish a comfortable home. She did not leave with nothing, but she did not gain the power to sell the business out from under me. The court ordered Elaine to pay part of the forensic accounting costs and part of my legal fees because of inconsistent financial disclosures and positions the judge found unsupported. Questions involving altered documents and electronic signatures were referred for further review. There was no dramatic arrest in the courtroom. Elaine walked out beside her attorney, carrying the same leather folder she had brought every day. That ordinary departure felt more truthful than handcuffs would have. Consequences rarely arrive with music. They arrive as lost credibility, restricted choices, expensive obligations, and relationships that no favorable ruling can restore. Noah was not spared. He signed a civil repayment agreement, continued cooperating with investigators, and formally resigned from Mercer Heritage. His attorney negotiated from a position of full disclosure, but no one promised him immunity. When he asked whether he could return to the company after the case ended, I told him not yet. Pressing play had revealed the truth. It had not repaired 3 years of decisions. Rebuilding Mercer Heritage took longer than winning control of it. The canceled city contract did not return. The supervisor who left stayed with our competitor. The Hocking Hills cabin belonged to another family, and I sometimes imagined them sitting on the porch I had built for a retirement that never came. We created an independent board with 2 outside members and required dual approval for major transfers. Company succession would no longer be discussed through secret drafts or promises made at family dinners. I informed employees about the new controls without exposing every private detail. Luis stayed and helped stabilize the field crews. By the following spring, we had secured 2 smaller restoration projects and reopened a portion of the credit line. The business survived, but survival looked humbler than victory. My name remained on the building. Yet I no longer mistook authority for proof that I had been right. Systems were installed because even people who love each other can become dangerous when trust is expected to replace accountability. Noah accepted a project management position with a commercial builder in Dayton. It paid less than he had earned with me and carried no promise of ownership. He rented a small apartment and began sending monthly repayments from his salary. On Thursday mornings, he drove to Columbus and met me at a diner near the interstate. For the first several months, we spoke carefully, as though one wrong sentence might reopen the courtroom. Eventually, he told me how exhausting it had been to live as my designated successor while never knowing whether he had my respect. I told him how deeply his affidavit had wounded me, and how often I still questioned whether his recordings were courage or delayed self-preservation. Both, he said. I believed him. Trust returned in small, unimpressive acts arriving when promised. Answering difficult questions, showing me a bank statement without being asked. I stopped measuring reconciliation by whether he would someday run my company. For the first time, I tried to know the man without evaluating the employee. Elaine moved into a condominium near her sister. 6 months after the ruling, she sent me a handwritten letter. She wrote that she had spent years feeling like a guest inside decisions that shaped her life. She said finding the succession agreement convinced her I planned to preserve everything except her dignity. She admitted that North Cedar grew beyond protection and that fear became permission to do things she once would have condemned. But she also wrote, "You will tell yourself I destroyed our marriage because that is easier than admitting how long I was alone inside it." I read the sentence several times. Part of me wanted to compose a list of every lie she had told. Instead, I placed the letter in a drawer with the original succession draft. Both documents described decisions made without the other person's consent. They were not morally equal, but they belonged to the same ruined history. I never answered her, and we did not attempt reconciliation. The old Worthington house was sold as part of the settlement. On the morning before closing, I drove past it without stopping. A young couple stood in the front yard while their daughter traced her fingers along the brick walkway. I remembered the day I paid off the mortgage and believed I had completed my duty to the people inside. I had understood debt only as money owed. I knew better now. Silence creates debt. Control creates debt. Love offered only through provision creates a balance someone eventually tries to collect. Elaine collected hers through deception. Noah tried to escape his by recording the person who had drawn him into it. I paid mine through the loss of a marriage, part of a company, a cabin, and the certainty that sacrifice automatically made me a good husband or father. None of us walked away innocent. That was not the ending I would have chosen. But it was the first version that did not require another lie. People later said Noah saved me when he pressed play. I understood why they saw it that way. Without those recordings, Elaine's account might have controlled the hearing, and the documents could have left Noah appearing solely responsible. But a button did not save our family. It only stopped one story from drowning out every other one. Noah's recordings exposed his mother's plan, his own complicity, and the kind of man I had been when I believed providing money excused withholding trust. I kept Mercer Heritage, but I stopped treating it as the measure of my life. Noah did not inherit a company. He earned the chance to rebuild a relationship. Elaine did not take control of our future. But her first fear was finally acknowledged as real. At 66, I learned that truth does not restore what betrayal destroys. It gives you something harder and more useful, the freedom to build whatever comes next, without pretending the foundation was ever sound.